What's up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net, prowrestling.com, and of course, Fight TV. That's F-I-T-E, fight.tv, and make sure you download their app. Check us out every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. As always, I'm your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino of prowrestling.com. And Nick, what's up, buddy?
Not too much. Got a lot to talk about. Another week. We're gearing up for Extreme Rules. We have a roster of WWE stars that's piling up with injuries, which is sort of forcing Extreme Rules to change a little bit. So we might talk a little bit more about that later and sort of the current state of the roster, and for that matter, the current state of WWE. So I'm ready to dive right into it.
And I want to start off the show and talk a little bit about the fact that it is my birthday as we record this, July 3rd.
Really?
So
your birthday, your birthday falls on Rusev Day.
It falls on Rusev Day. And
has that always been difficult for you growing up? You know, your birthday is on Rusev Day, so it's like people who are born on Christmas,
right?
So you have to deal with the fact that your birthday is on
Rusev Day.
So he's the one that's getting all the attention. Everybody's going to see him, and you know what
it's
I
a
mean,
little
and
discouraging
do their thing with him.
You know, because I'm somewhat a narcissist, so yeah, it's discouraging. It's a little depressive to not, you know. I take pills for it, but it's good.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, I obviously can tell.
I mean, most people can.
I didn't realize you took the pills because of the Rusev Day happy birthday. I thought it was issues that were a lot deeper than that.
No. Those we deal with.
You need to be on those.
Yeah, we deal with those in completely different therapeutic manners than taking pills. But no, just the pills for the fact that Rusev Day and my birthday is always on the same day every year.
Well, listen, man, I am sorry to hear it.
But I'm
wishing you a very happy birthday.
Thank you, brother. And I want to say, man, I mean, it's been a good day, Nick. It's been a good day. I woke up to my daughter, my 10-year-old amazing daughter, who I'm going to make sure watches this show because she'll love to get the shout out. You know, bringing me food and breakfast in bed.
Nice.
I did a little bit of work and, of course, planning for tonight's show. So it's all around. Been very stress-free, very, very relaxed, and everything's going well. And I don't want VLW, I don't want our show tonight and this week to bring me down. And so I felt like we can only talk about things that interest me, right? And unfortunately, this day and age, there's not that much right now, at least, going on. We're kind of in a lull period where I think WWE's trying to kind of figure out how to handle certain things, you know, and unfortunately, we've got to figure out kind of what they're going to do next and how they're going to start building some of these stars up to a level that they're going to accept and respect and respond to. And we've talked about Roman Reigns 100 times. We'll probably talk about him some tonight because we now know, Nick, that obviously Roman Reigns, Bobby Lashley is going to take place. But let's put Roman aside. I want to start off this week a little bit about Bobby Lashley because we've talked a little bit about him as well. And as far as just kind of the state of the affairs for WWE and some of its superstars, they're giving Bobby Lashley a pretty high-profile match now against their golden boy as of now and today in Roman Reigns. And unfortunately, as much as fans are not wanting to see this version of Roman, or maybe any version of Roman, unfortunately for Roman, as far as a large sector of the fan base, Nick, this week on Raw was not much different as it relates to Bobby Lashley either. And so it doesn't seem to me like Bobby is really a good guy right now because of how they've handled him since he's come back into the company. He's not moving the needle at least in a positive way. He could move it. This combination between the two of them could move the needle in a negative way, the wrong way. But it's certainly this feud, even if it's short term, even if it's just Extreme Rules, to me, Nick, Bobby Lashley, unfortunately, isn't in any situation or any position to help Roman Reigns in the way that WWE is hoping that he could. And I feel I think I feel worse for Bobby Lashley, obviously, than I do for Roman Reigns because of that. But how do you view this now? It's official. Bobby, Roman, Extreme Rules. Is any part of you thinking this is going to move the needle one way or the other?
No, I completely agree with you. You know, this is a situation, and that is, it's as much evidenced by what they're doing with Brock Lesnar, as much as it's being evidenced by what they're doing with Bobby Lashley, or in the case of Bobby Lashley specifically, what they have not done with him. You know, they are thinking or trying to think so far outside of the box with Brock Lesnar and this idea of, you know, his contract issues, and he doesn't want to show up to work, and is he going to go to UFC? I mean, they are going to great extremes to make the fans really believe that Brock Lesnar is indeed walking out on this company to make him, with potentially with that WWE Universal title, to make him so hated that maybe they're going to tolerate not even necessarily Roman Reigns,
right,
but any program that you see Roman Reigns in right now. But I think the problem is, because the fan base, at least what we're seeing on television, is rejecting the position that they put Roman Reigns in. I think no matter who he's with, whether it's a Bobby Lashley,
right,
whether it's Brock Lesnar, the fans are rejecting the position that they continue to put Roman Reigns in, which is that main event spot. So here comes another pay-per-view with Extreme Rules coming up, and it's Roman Reigns in the main event once again, in that high-profile position once again, that could have Universal title implications,
right, if
he wins, if he moves on to SummerSlam. And I think people are just rejecting that entire scenario. So it doesn't matter who he's paired up with, you know? Now, they're not doing themselves any services or any benefits by how they're also booking a guy like Bobby Lashley.
Exactly, right.
Since he's debuted, we've talked about this, and we don't need to mention it again. It's just been terrible, the storyline stuff he was doing with Sami Zayn. And if you look at Brock Lesnar, here's a great question. If they want the fans to be so upset that a guy like Brock Lesnar is going to leave the company with the Universal title,
right,
well, how much are we really supposed to care about the Universal title right now when we never see it? It's never defended. It's never on television. We don't even see the guy who's holding it. So not only are they, you know, not only are they doing a disservice creatively to somebody like a Bobby Lashley, they're doing a disservice to somebody like Brock Lesnar, they're now doing a disservice to the Universal title. They're trying to push this storyline and this agenda with Brock Lesnar so hard that now I don't really know how much I care about the Universal title. I personally am looking more forward to seeing Intercontinental title matches.
And let me,
because I'm seeing that title and those stars that are wrestling for it on my television set.
Well, and to kind of switch gears a little bit and not talk so much, because I said only things that interest me, only things that cheer me up.
It is
Bobby
your
and,
birthday.
Yeah.
So
Bobby
because
and
it's your
Roman.
Birthday, we get to take the very first 9 minutes of the show and talk about whatever you want, and then the rest of the time is dedicated to Rusev. So go ahead.
And Bobby and Roman depress me, but I will say that I think because of the situation that you just laid out, Nick, the Universal title obviously not being there, the fact that they really haven't done a very good job pushing Roman, they haven't done a good job pushing Bobby. But you can see what they're trying to do now to fill their time while Brock Lesnar's not there. And that brings us now to the Intercontinental Championship and a feud that I'm really looking forward to. And, you know, I will say that I don't know if we did a tag in, tag out on this, Nick, but I know that we both kind of discussed it. And I specifically said that I wasn't really excited or confident in the fact that Dolph just kind of out of nowhere wins the Intercontinental title, right? However, at this juncture now, several weeks in, Nick. I'm asking because I'm more excited about this. I think it's been a pretty good program. I'm curious to what you think as far as how do you feel right now about Dolph Ziggler as the Intercontinental Champion? And do you think that it's at least something that the fans are starting to buy into, if for no other reason than how good Seth is and how good Dolph is, and compared to the guys like Roman and Bobby, individually, they're at least over with the fans, and the fans, I think, are respecting them enough to give them the time here. So Dolph wasn't neither one of our picks necessarily, and it was kind of, all right, now here's another, throw Dolph in the mix for a minute, won't be taken very serious. Have you had any reason to reconsider that at this point? Because I was right there with you when it happened, but I'm kind of reconsidering, and I'm a little excited right now about McIntyre, Dolph Ziggler, and of course the feud right now as it stands between all three of them, but specifically with Seth and Dolph. I think it's actually been really good for both of these guys.
Absolutely. And, I was, just like you were, I was a tag out on this when it happened, when he won the title. And even going back before that, when they moved Dolph Ziggler
him over to
SmackDown
Raw.
over to Raw, if you remember, I was a big tag out on that.
Yeah.
Because for me, that just was a situation of, okay, just
lateral move, nothing.
Same crap, different day.
Right.
Just same crap, different brand.
Yep.
They're just going to take them from one, swap them to another, and nothing's going to happen. But now we saw this really great pairing with Drew McIntyre, and we're seeing him go up against someone who he can really, really match up with in the ring, in a Seth Rollins. These are three guys right now that really have all of the tools. These are guys that are fantastic in the ring. They look great. They have a great skill set on the mic. They're just three really, really well-rounded talents. And I think they're working really well together. Personally, I like it when they're involving Roman Reigns in that, because that's what Roman Reigns really needs. I think he can benefit more from that. It's also not a main event picture, which is what I think the fans are rejecting. So I don't want to disintegrate into more Roman Reigns talk, but I do think that's a good fit for him with those guys. But so I'm going to, on the whole here, tag in on Dolph Ziggler as the champion right now. I still think, though, Chris, that this is moving toward Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre. And I still have this sneaking suspicion that, Dolph Ziggler's going to be the guy that gets left behind in this.
Really?
And that it's going to end up being, or maybe even if it's not so much Drew McIntyre versus Seth Rollins per se, isn't the end game here to build up Drew McIntyre? And I think maybe we kind of talked about that when it first happened, and I really strongly felt like, well, this is going to be nothing for Ziggler. This is all about McIntyre. But I have been very, very pleasantly surprised with the fact that this has done equal good for Dolph Ziggler as it has for Drew McIntyre. But I still have that feeling like at the end of the day, it's supposed to be for Drew McIntyre.
So I see where you're going. I think that I look at it two ways. I think, this is kind of the transition of bringing Dolph back into the light and Drew. It makes a lot of sense that you got the veteran Dolph Ziggler, the kind of the up-and-comer maybe, and Drew. You utilize the two of them and their strengths. And, of course, Dolph's experience, he has been one of those kind of throwaway guys for so long now, despite how good he is. And utilize Dolph and his abilities to help put over Drew. I think that's the easiest way to go. But let's because I'm such a big fan of Dolph Ziggler, and I don't think he really ever has had his claim to fame that he deserves in the company. I want to at least hope as a fan of his, Nick, that they don't go this route. The way I see it is I think that Drew McIntyre, and I think that's why this is such a good fit for the two of them. Drew McIntyre is the unproven at this point, the non-proven commodity that they've got. They need to see how well he can get over. I don't necessarily liken this to Shawn Michaels and Diesel. I mean, even though it is a similar, an easy comparison that maybe you could try to make, but I do think that it could go this direction. I mean, you kind of look back at the history of Shawn Michaels and Diesel before Diesel came out and decided to go somewhere. It was all about Shawn Michaels in the beginning. The IC title, I mean, the world title. He's always had the bodyguards that kind of lifted him to that next level. And it was fairly late in his career. I mean, it wasn't something where, hey, he's immediately coming out of the gate and they give him the opportunities. Dolph isn't too old at this point by any stretch. And he's just better. I mean, his mic skills are 100 times better. He's at a point now where I think he's ripe to actually go the distance if they decided to do that. And I'm not saying that they'll have any type of success to the degree that Shawn Michaels or Kevin Nash obviously ultimately had, as far as in the eyes of the company or the fans. But I do think that this is setting it up. And to be honest, Nick, I don't know that Drew McIntyre is necessarily the route that they're wanting to go with Seth Rollins. I think that what probably happens if they stick with this long enough, give them the tag titles possibly to give them more credibility. Let them work together for a good extended period of time, Nick. And then I think, and again, don't do this too soon because that's just kind of too cliche and it's part of the issues that WWE has that we're also going to talk about here in a little bit as far as their long-term booking never being there. But Nick, to me, I see if this does go long enough and they keep it relevant enough, I think the actual natural angle here for both of these guys would be Dolph versus Drew, obviously. But I'm not talking anytime soon, Nick. But I do think that is the natural thing. And you remember one of the first promos they had together, Nick, where Drew mentioned, hey, this is just the first of many titles to come. There's not a lot of titles that these guys are actually in line for that make a lot of sense. So to me, the tag team titles are probably where they're headed at some point, which would be probably a blessing considering how bad the tag team division is these days, especially on the Raw side. So, but to me, I think that again, you're trying to build stars right now, and that's what they're doing. We're going to talk about Braun. We're going to talk about Kevin Owens, who's getting a lot of spotlight right now, too, while you're trying to shift some of the focus off of Brock not being there. All of that. Like, you're seeing these guys being given their opportunities. Who's going to rise up, Nick? I think that Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre, because of this pairing and because of WWE taking it this seriously so far, I mean, I think that's the natural thing down the line, and I'm not going to give it enough. I'm not going to give it enough credit just yet to say that it could ever amount to what Shawn Michaels became as far as Dolph is concerned, or what Diesel and Kevin Nash did in their career. But it's possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible. You know what I mean? I mean, it's possible.
Do you not think WWE as they're booking
your
this?
Your birthday could become more popular than Rusev Day.
I
don't think it's going to happen.
Do you not think, though, Nick, that maybe with this, because I didn't know if they were taking kind of a bodyguard route. I mean, they're trying to keep them somewhat equal, but it does seem Dolph is the centerpiece right now. Do you not think WWE has Shawn Michaels and his collage of bodyguards and stuff, maybe in the back of their mind anyway?
Oh yeah, I mean,
because Dolph has always been kind of an easy comparison to Shawn anyway.
I was just gonna say, anything Dolph Ziggler does, you can always it's just so easy to compare him to Shawn Michaels. Right. He just has that look and that feel.
Yeah.
And I will say this, I give them a lot of credit for going in the direction of the IC title as opposed to what I think we all thought they were going to do initially, which is go in the direction of the tag team titles. I thought this was going to be a tag team title situation where it's going to be Dolph and Drew versus Wyatt and Hardy, or then maybe the B team, and that's just not where those guys belong right now. So I'm glad they went in the other direction, which is something that, I don't think many people predicted, which is the IC title. And I got to disagree with you, Chris. I don't think the tag titles, given the division right now on Raw, is the natural progression for McIntyre and Ziggler.
All right, why not?
A step down or a step back for them.
Why not? I mean, why?
Just because really, who are they going to build up really to work with? If the idea here, look, they have to start, and I think one of the genesis of the this conversation that we're having right now, part of the genesis of it was WWE building up new stars. And I think everybody agrees, and there have been a lot of pro wrestlers out there, a lot of legends, guys like the Jim Rosses and the Jerry Lawlers and the Jim Cornettes that have all vouched for Drew McIntyre. That is their pick right now for the guy who they think, Sean Waltman, I believe, said it. He's a guy with tremendous upside. He is the future of the company. I think they need to start fast tracking someone into that main event picture. And because, look at who the fans are rejecting right now. With some of these injured talents on the roster right now, the fans are rejecting Roman Reigns as that main event guy.
True. And
I don't know if WWE is going to slow down on pushing him. Who knows what's going to happen with Lesnar? Lesnar could be gone. So who is that next guy that you're priming? And I just don't necessarily know right now that in the tag team division, there's anybody that, maybe aside from Hardy and Wyatt, that, these guys can work with, McIntyre and Ziggler, that is, that's really going to convince me that McIntyre's on his way to being that main event level guy.
Okay, so let me then take it a step back and say that I don't think I look at it from a standpoint of what can Dolph and Drew provide to the tag team division, nor do I look at it what talent is there to necessarily provide some sort of credible threat to Dolph and Drew. I look at this solely as what's more important right now. To me, the tag team division, Nick, as a whole, is floundering, and I agree with your assessment that they should absolutely put all tag teams, or at least the majority of them that are as far in one title on one brand. I think that makes more sense because they really have a hard time building credible tag teams as it is, especially when you separate it into two shows. But this is not about, to me, then if the tag team division is suffering as a whole, then why not then use the titles as simple props to then elevate Dolph and Drew as a package fully? So to me, it doesn't matter because they need to kind of, run ramshot on all of the tag team guys anyway. And this is the perfect division for it because nobody really in the tag team division to me is getting over to any large sustainable degree. I mean, Bray and Matt Hardy, maybe to some degree, Nick, you can say that they're there, but to me, that's not even the case. I think Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt are a commodity and they're good, but I think it was confusing how they got together. I think it's kind of still confusing listening to them kind of talk all over each other. And I think that this has been a fun segment, a fun bit and gimmick between them and then, of course, Axel and Bo Dallas, which I did want to talk about at some point as well, because I think that this is too soon for this to really come to a head. And what do you gain with Bo and Axel winning the titles? Like the chase for the titles and them winning, meaningless matches is what this makes this fun. When you then ask me to actually take them as credible and serious as champions, I'm going to probably have a lot different, outlook on their success. So to me, this is the perfect time, Nick, in my mind, for them to say, what do we have in Dolph Ziggler? And they should know that by now. And Dolph is somebody that the fans will absolutely accept, Nick. And it's my damn birthday, so you can't argue with that at this point. And I think obviously just for the same reasons you mentioned, I think they're very high on Drew McIntyre, and he is a breath of fresh air and a good look and a good talk and everything, the whole package. But sometimes, Nick, and this is kind of why we can now start kind of segueing into what another thing we wanted to talk about this week is the long game, the long con, the fact that WWE doesn't do this. And then that'll lead us into a conversation about NXT versus WWE's mainstream shows and the difference between those and the fact that NXT can do so many things right, whereas Raw and SmackDown can't, and why that is, and why these guys coming up from NXT don't translate well, and all of that. So we got a lot to discuss. But in the meantime, To me, as we again kind of talk about a long-term deal, Dolph and Drew deserve, in my mind, at this point, a lot of confidence from the company. Put some stock into these guys and think about the long term of the Intercontinental Championship and of these guys together first and foremost, and then separately down the road. And that's why I think sometime next year, hell, maybe 2 years, but that might be too far, asking too much. But let's say next year sometime, then you turn Drew and Dolph on one another and you push them separately by starting and breaking them up. And to me, that is something, Nick, that I think WWE needs to start thinking about, because you can sacrifice certain lambs, Nick, in my opinion, as far as and I'm grouping the tag team division as one solid lamb. Like you can sacrifice today's tag team division, Nick, for the better good of someone like Dolph and someone like Drew McIntyre, both together and individually. Would you not agree with that, or do you think that Bray Wyatt and Matt Hardy and the B team need to be protected in some way?
Well, no. I mean, they don't need to be protected. I mean, there's not going to be. I think the ship has sailed. Look, we know what WWE historically thinks of Matt Hardy. He's a glass ceiling guy. He's 100%. Never going to rise above a certain level in WWE.
Bray might be
his fault, but because that's just WWE's impression of him.
And hey, Bray might be that way too. I mean, they may think that of Bray at this point. I don't.
Absolutely,
but they might.
They've all but squashed Bray. And Curtis Axel and Bo Dallas have been nothing but, comedy act jokes in WWE. So I don't really think there's any reason to believe that they are looking to protect these guys or really elevate them in the future any more than they already have been. So,
and nor should they.
No, I don't know. There's been no reason to. I mean, well, look. Nor should they. Bray Wyatt, I always feel like Bray Wyatt has a tremendous upside.
I do too.
I feel like Bray Wyatt is a guy that could be an absolute main event superstar
100%.
in WWE. But maybe what your point is that they just with it's been so long with him. Is WWE going to pull that trigger? I mean, and honestly, it's kind of the same way you look at a guy like Dolph Ziggler.
Right.
Those are both guys, the Matt Hardys, the Dolph Zigglers, the Bray Wyatts. Those are all guys that have all been at that, right around hovering at that point. They've all had great careers. Hardy and Dolph Ziggler, very, very successful, long careers. Very successful. But really haven't been used in those main event spots like potentially some fans would want them to.
Sure. Well, and I think that kind of does, again, talk about like where we're at in WWE and what we have going on. And then we have talked a little bit about NXT, Nick, a little while back. And the idea of, should it be treated as kind of a third brand, or even go, we went so far to suggest that maybe they're looking at it more like a separate company in some ways. And Nick, I think the more I reflected on that, and now even over the past couple of months since we had that discussion even further back then, I've really come to the conclusion that whether they mean to or not, like I understand the whole point of NXT, I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but Nick, to me, it's never been more evident at this point that NXT and even its real, true, loyal circle of fans, like it's never felt more to me like a separate company, a separate entity, a separate, all together entirely, completely different structure, completely different guidelines, completely different rules. One of the things that we talked about, Nick, about NXT was the fact that they allow these guys to get away with so much in their in-ring storytelling. I mean, they let these guys put their bodies through hell And I, kind of made that bold statement of they don't really care about these guys until they get to that next level. So yeah, let's go let them out there, go kill yourselves, guys. We don't mind. It's all for the big, the big fun of it. And then once you get up to that next level, then we'll try to protect you. That's not changed, obviously. And Nick, you and I, before we came on the air, we're kind of discussing some things, and I think this is a good time to maybe bring up Bayley, because to me, Bayley was over like $1 million. She hasn't translated to the level she was at in NXT, obviously, on the main roster, and I think there's a number of reasons that could be that. But just this a couple weeks ago on Raw, we get a taste of what Bayley can be and what she can do, and the fans react amazing to it. And yet now we're back to bad acting. We're back to the entertainment side of WWE, as you put it off the air earlier. I want you to kind of, elaborate a little bit more on your thoughts and how it relates specifically, though, Nick, also to NXT and WWE's, allowance of these guys to develop characters that are clearly getting over. Even if it's a subset of fans that are watching this more religiously than the vast audience that watches just Raw and SmackDown, but you're not hearing those responses, Nick, on WWE Raw or SmackDown, or at least very few exceptions, right? Rare is it for you to hear those types of reactions that you hear pretty much the entire show through NXT. So why can't they do more like that with Bayley from a couple weeks ago? Why can't that stuff translate for when these guys from NXT coming up to WWE? Where's the bottleneck, Nick? Where's the buck that's stopping it from happening? Who is it? What is it? Why is it not translating? I don't get it.
Well, there definitely is, and I know people are going to argue this all over the place. It's such a great question. It's the question, and in my opinion, they are two different fan bases. Triple H says this all the time when he's asked this question. They are different fan bases.
Is that an excuse, though, Nick? Is that an excuse?
That hardcore internet wrestling fan that, in addition to, we can all agree on the fact that the hardcore internet wrestling fan loves the in-ring wrestling.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We get that.
Right.
But in addition to that, they like the quirky, silly, sort of, maybe comedic, off-the-wall characters. You got the Velveteen Dream who's coming out, and he's a bit more of an off-the-wall character. And when he did his match with Ricochet, they did the homage to The Rock versus Hogan in the costumes and everything. And I think they liked that. They loved Bayley's gimmick, her, because think about it. Think about Bayley's gimmick. And do you ever actually associate Bayley with those things that fly all over the place?
No, because
like when you think of Bayley, do you think of like the front of a car lot that has one of those giant orange things flying around in the air?
No.
So, what was that? What was that gimmick? Again, I think it was goofy. It was definitely wrestling. It was that aspect of wrestling that when you tell your friends, you love wrestling, you can't really explain why you like this aspect of it. It's a niche audience thing. It's dare I say nerdy,
Yeah.
But it has a fan base that people really like. And it's a big fan base too. It's a very vocal, passionate fan base, and
sure.
I like it. I consider myself part of that fan base. So gimmicks like that translate to those fan bases, whereas I think the main roster fan base, at the end of the day, and this has been an age-old argument that you and I have had many times, and people like Jim Ross, I remember him explaining it the best, when you say, what do they prefer? Do they want the wrestling? Do they want the story? Well, ultimately, I believe they want the story. I believe that at the end of the day, the fans are going to be more interested in, who was it that hit Stone Cold Steve Austin with the car?
Absolutely.
More so than they are going to be interested in maybe a 90-minute Iron Man match 100%. Or something like that, right?
Yep.
But that's not to say, though, that you can't give them a good, healthy mix of both. And I think I remember Jim Ross calling it sizzle versus steak,
right.
And I remember guys back in the day saying, the idea of television is to give them like 25% in-ring wrestling, 75% storyline, which is setting up for the pay-per-view, which is the reverse.
Right.
That's 75% in-ring wrestling, 25% story. So,
sure.
And I have friends, I have friends that, will only watch WWE pay-per-views because they prefer the wrestling. I've got friends that only really want to watch,
Raw,
the storyline
SmackDown,
stuff.
right.
That only want to watch Raw because they like the promos,
Yeah.
And then as soon as a match comes on, they tend to just sort of drone out and they're not really interested in the wrestling. So there is that difference. And so I can understand that problem of something not translating as well from one fan base in NXT to the main roster fan base. But look at, and I've said this a million times on the show, and I'm always going to say it, look at the reaction that the fans gave Bayley. Whether or when she turned on Sasha Banks and she attacked her last week on Raw, it was the biggest reaction she has gotten on the main roster probably since the day she debuted.
Right.
And what was it? It was a wrestler fighting another wrestler. I've said this a million times. Fans don't want to see wrestlers get along. They don't want to see them be friends. This is not a show about, pro wrestling is not a television show about friendships and lasting friendships. It's about those friendships that may exist that inevitably turn bad and become violent. And that's what fans want to see. Stone Cold Steve Austin was a babyface, but there was nothing babyface about him. He didn't get along with anybody. He attacked everybody. He fought everybody. Vince McMahon, Mike Tyson, Booker T, Jim Ross, put anybody in the ring, Steve Austin will fight him. The Rock had a very similar attitude. So WWE, I think the one thing that translates amongst the two fan bases, the NXT and the main roster fan base, is the fact that fans want to see intensity. The best feud we've seen in NXT in the past year or so has been Ciampa versus Gargano. And that started as a blood feud.
Yeah.
And people like that. So, but what WWE on the main roster always defaults to is entertainment. You look at Banks versus Bayley. We saw what Bayley did last week. How does WWE follow up with it? With the Dr. Shelby acting, the acting stuff. They go to the entertainment stuff. They try to do the comedy sketches. Look at last night's main event of Raw. You had Braun Strowman versus Kevin Owens, and that did not end. That was not a match. That did not end in a long 30-minute wrestling match. It ended with one guy putting another guy in a toilet and throwing him off of a stage.
Yeah.
So, again, instead of going with the intensity angle to that and the physical angle, I guess you could call it physicality because of what he did. But it fell under the entertainment umbrella and the shtick umbrella and the scripted, more or less, movie-like, when Vince McMahon calls his product a TV show or a movie, it's going in that direction as opposed to the sports direction of the wrestling. And to me, I look at it and I say, look at how the fans reacted 1 week ago when Bayley just balls out, beat the crap out of Sasha Banks.
Right.
That was 25 times better than anything we saw on Raw this week with the Dr. Shelby acting stuff.
I think also, Nick, part of my issue with NXT versus WWE and the limits they put on WWE for some reason versus NXT, as gimmicky as it sometimes is, and Nick, there's been gimmicks in wrestling, kind of cheesiness in wrestling for years, but
yeah,
during that time, though, wrestling You didn't have to be the closet fan. Wrestling was simply cool, right? And I feel like there's a cool factor with NXT because of what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to say, the storytelling, all of that. It's a legitimate cool factor. The shit they do in the ring is cool. The stories they tell, it's all entertaining. Like, and I also don't necessarily always like in certain points that there's a distinction between necessarily entertainment, the entertainment side of wrestling, and the wrestling side of wrestling. When it's done right, Nick, it's all combined, and it's entertaining. Sure. Even the match, because
of course.
Yeah, because obviously the story, the great storytelling and the entertainment side of things build into a match that you're so intrigued by because they do a good job telling that story. That then the match itself, the outcome, it's all a part of. Yeah, the payoff is all a part of the entertainment. So I feel like they're not doing that job on the main roster and on the main shows like they can with NXT. And I'm curious to your thoughts on why that is, Nick. Like, why do you think maybe WWE hasn't taken the step back to look at all right, yes, maybe we are trying to change our philosophy a little bit. We're catering more to children. We're kind of, we've gone in that direction. But PG does not limit them to such a degree that they can't find ways to make their product cool. And it's an entire overflow, Nick, where parts of it might be okay. We've got some cool people in wrestling these days, but by and large on Raw and SmackDown, especially Raw though, compared to NXT, the cool factor is not there at all. And I'm curious to why you think that is, at least on the main roster level, why they just don't think that way anymore. Like, surely they don't look at the product and think that people think it's cool, right?
I mean,
fans might, but our kids might.
I honestly don't think. No, well, I don't know. They could. I feel like when you're watching some of this stuff, especially the overly gimmicky stuff, the overly silly stuff, it just always feels to me like this is being done to please Vince McMahon. Because they know, the staff knows, the creative team knows that this is the kind of stuff Vince likes. Vince is gonna laugh at the fart jokes and the dick jokes and the silly, more baseless, lowbrow humor. That's the stuff that they are going to, that's the stuff that's gonna really tickle Vince McMahon's fancy. They released a press release today. They did a spoof press release, after LeBron James did his announcement via the tweeted press release saying he was going to LA. WWE did a parody version of that, where they released a press release saying Braun Strowman put a man in a porta potty on Raw last night and threw him off a stage, And I feel like, honestly, whoever wrote that, they gave that to Vince McMahon, and you could just hear him giggling. Just slapping his knee, laughing hilarious, saying, "Oh, that's great." You put that out there,
Right.
So, and again, and look, are we going to look who's running the different brands? Vince McMahon runs the one brand, Triple H runs the other brand, you know? And when you're seeing Triple H's approach, when you were looking at the UK title tournament that they just did, when you're looking at 205 Live, when you're looking at NXT, these are the shows that Triple H oversees. You're seeing the entertainment presented in a very different way, which is a bit more of a sports-oriented fashion. But here's the thing, though, Chris. People will, ratings are lower, right? Ratings are a lot lower right now, and people will argue why. Well, you'll have people say, well, it's because, there's no emphasis on wrestling. Well, you've got some of the best wrestlers in the world in WWE right now, and that's not drawing. So is it more about you'll have the opinions like the people who are in the Vince Russo camp that would say, nope, it's the storytelling. It's the storytelling. If you look back in the late 90s, you look at the shows that were, they're drawing 5-6 million viewers. What were they doing? They were doing the bra and panties matches. They were doing the Mae Young delivering birth to a ham McMahon. They were doing, the main events were Stone Cold stunning Steve Austin. It was not, Stone Cold stunning Vince McMahon. It was not an emphasis on this. It was not, WWE is not being presented as a sports product. It wasn't a Ring of Honor. It wasn't a New Japan. It was really, really sort of over-the-top entertainment. And that was drawing really well.
Well,
but to me, I think it just goes back to what you said, which is one was cooler, or at least one was perceived as cooler, and one is not now. And who defines cool? Not 6 to 10-year-olds.
No.
Cool is defined by that late teen into the 18 to 49 demographic.
Sure.
That's who defines cool. And so I still believe at the end of the day that that's the group that isn't necessarily feeling that WWE is cool, and they feel like NXT is cool.
Well, one of the kind of final topics we can get into, Nick, which kind of really sums all of this up, in my opinion, and everything as far as the state of WWE and where we're at, is Daniel Bryan. I mean, one of their big stars just recently had an interview where he, and I think it was with the Gorilla Position, I think is a podcast or something, and go to YouTube and check it out. But Daniel Bryan, Gorilla Position, go look that up on YouTube and you'll probably find it, where the interviewers asked him about The Miz, the angle and the storyline with The Miz, and the possibility, Nick, of that match taking place at WrestleMania 35. And I think, and again, this is kind of a paraphrase as far as what the interviewers asked, but they basically asked him, can WWE keep up the story until WrestleMania next year? And this is his quote: "I am definitely up for it. My question, you asked me that question, I will answer it with a question. Do you trust WWE with telling that story from now until WrestleMania 35? Like, what in the last several years has shown to you that something like that is possible here?" And Nick, I want to kind of open the floor to you first, and I want to ask what you thought when you heard this. I mean, we can talk about the substance of the actual quote itself here in a minute, but I'm curious, just that's gutsy, even for Daniel Bryan and all of his superstardom at this point, Nick. I was surprised he said that about WWE, his employers.
I wasn't surprised, because I think Daniel Bryan is a pretty honest person. And when he does interviews, I think that's really what people love so much about him. If you want to get into the reasons why, it should just be so clear to WWE. Why is Roman Reigns not working and Daniel Bryan does? It's because of things like this. They allow Daniel Bryan to be Daniel Bryan, and they're not allowing Roman Reigns to be Roman Reigns. And that's what he needs to do.
Sure.
But so I wasn't surprised that he said it. I did say to myself, what balls on this guy, that he's going to really basically call WWE out on its ability to tell, he didn't necessarily say, well, okay, think about it like this. Is he, if we want to read into his words here, is he equating a long-term storyline to a good storyline?
Right.
In other words, is it possible for WWE to tell a really great story in 4 weeks as opposed to 1 year? Right. Look at storylines that we've seen maybe back in 2017. I really, really liked Samoa Joe versus Brock Lesnar. Could we really say that was a great storyline, though? It was for one pay-per-view. It's a 4-week storyline. I don't know that I could call that great. So I think maybe in Daniel Bryan's mind, he is equating that idea of long-term storyline to really being one of the only vehicles to getting a truly great storyline out. And again, the evidence there is Tommaso Ciampa versus Johnny Gargano. These are guys that have had that really long storyline, and the audience is really feeling it, I think mostly due to the fact that this has been prolonged in such an entertaining way. So I thought it was ballsy of him to sort of call out the company in terms of their storytelling, but he's right.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has to have peaks and valleys. And I think with WWE, they want to give you the beginning and they want to give you the end. And sometimes they may drop a story and they'll sort of come back to it. But we've been talking about this for so long. Hey, didn't I say not too long ago, the Shield should maybe, like, if we talk about the Shield's breakup, we should be saying the Shield broke up 6 months ago. And I'm talking about that first breakup,
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were together for like a year. And then, that's it. That faction's done.
Yeah.
You just don't see anything. And we've always talked about the irony of the fact that WWE with Raw, they have 3 hours of they have 3 hours of show to fill every week. You'd think you'd want to slow down the storylines, pump the brakes a little bit on these storylines, as opposed to hurrying them up and rushing them, because every week, every Monday night, you've got 3 more hours. But they don't want to do it. They want to tell these stories quickly. I think maybe they believe that, society nowadays wants to see everything happen right now, but I don't think that's true in terms of storytelling. I think as far as storytelling goes, I think people want to see the long, and remember, WWE's been around for a while. They've been telling these kinds of stories for a long time. I think the audience wants to see an in-depth story. Look at The Miz. The Miz storyline with Daniel Bryan really started because of that heated segment on Talking Smack, and that was a long time ago.
Sure.
And so you're still, even though they haven't even done anything with Daniel Bryan and The Miz really since then, because Daniel Bryan only has been cleared to return to action for a couple of months, you still want to see Daniel Bryan, as he keeps saying, the payoff there is punch The Miz in the face, You really still want to see that, just because that initial aspect of the storyline didn't have that payoff.
Right.
But hey, you want to ask me if I agree with Daniel Bryan? 100%. And I 100% agree that I don't know if WWE has shown us that they can't tell a long-term storyline. I think somewhere in there are people that work backstage in that company that remember how to do that.
Yeah.
I just think what they're showing you is they have no interest in doing it.
And I think, look, I agree with that. Right now, as it stands, looking at it, no way in hell can WWE tell this story the way it needs to be. But the only saving grace that I'll say for it, Nick, is that I think that's not what we're necessarily going to get completely. Yes, WWE is going to be the one telling it, but in the end, it's going to be The Miz and Daniel Bryan. The same way that it got started to begin with was these guys kind of going off script a little bit, showing some true passion and emotion, and that's what they're going to allow these guys to do. These are two guys that are at least veterans in the business now, to the point that they're going to be given some free rein here, some loose rope that allows them to go out there and tell the story the way they want to. And I think the interviews like this one with Daniel Bryan could kind of all play into that, whereas I don't think it's calculated right now that this interview was a part of this storyline. But in the end, I think that is what Daniel Bryan can bank on, and that he knows he can get away with this type of stuff because it's really him being him, and that's what's gotten him over in a lot of ways. It's what's kind of kick-started, along with The Miz obviously being himself, kick-started this feud to begin with. I think that's what we're going to get more of, and I 100% think that they could tell this story the right way if WWE brass that tends to kind of, again, cheese everything up. They do all the stuff that we've been criticizing tonight, Nick, as far as entertainment versus wrestling, all of that. The Miz and Daniel Bryan just need to be given some mics, have some platforms, some sit downs, etc. Some formats that allow them to just go. The rest will happen, then set up the matches and go with it. Like it's I may regret saying this, Nick, but it would be it's really foolproof. Like it would be hard to screw this up. I mean, it really would.
Sure.
I'm not saying WWE, I'm not going to put it past them completely, but it would really be hard to mess up the Miz and Daniel Bryan. That one's just there for you, the taking. It's there for you. It's easy. It should not be complicated, and you don't need to try and make it any more complicated, Nick, than it is. It's just let these guys go out there and do what they do. Now, Nick, we've got a few minutes left, and I want to kind of end again on a good note. It's been a little depressing. We've talked about everything we criticized, or what we think, what we find critical in a sense of WWE and everything. So I want to end a little bit more on a good note. And I want to ask that we give one thing to WWE. I mean, because it's easy for us to sit up here on our soapboxes, Nick, and talk about the WWE product and what's wrong with it. So maybe let's, I mean, it's one thing just to bitch about the issues. Let's maybe offer some solutions. So while I'm giving mine, I'll allow you the opportunity, Nick, to come up with one thing that you think, just whether it's an idea or a feud, a specific feud, or if it's just a general idea that they could put into place, right, Nick? That would hopefully help their company, maybe make it more cool again, or a feud, or a storyline, or a star they should push, something that you think would really hit home with the fans and help them out. And while you kind of contemplate that, because I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but it's my birthday, I'm allowed to do that too. I'm pretty much allowed to do whatever I want. I want to go back because you brought up the Shield, and I thought it just kind of popped a moment in my head again. We were all talking about coolness and everything, and I want to offer to WWE that they need to consider a real faction in WWE. I think when you look back at the success rate at this point, the success of factions and groups of people in the history of the wrestling business, it is easy to say that obviously they do well and people are into them. Take Nexus, for example, Nick, and they were on fire for a minute, and Wade Barrett was somebody that got to kind of catapult his career. They squandered some opportunities with him after the fact. They split up Nexus too quickly, but man, Nexus had all the media abuzz, Nick, and this was a group of nobodies. I mean, it was just because it's a group of people flocking to the ring at one time to beat up one guy, and it's a sight. It's something fun. It's like, why are they doing this? And that type of story is always easy to be told. It's like you let it fester a little bit, and then you eventually bring it home, and maybe you don't ever bring it home, and you run into issues like the NWO. But at the same time, the NWO, DX, Four Horsemen, The Shield, Nexus, I feel like there are plenty of examples, and there hasn't been a really strong, solid, long-term group, and I don't really consider The Shield. I mean, 3 people. The thing is, it needs to eventually evolve to maybe 4 or 5, some surprise guys. I mean, I want it to take the effect of an NWO or a Nexus or even Four Horsemen, which was obviously a little bit more confined to 4 people. That makes sense. But at the end of the day, a long-term faction would be great for the business right now, Nick. I don't care who you put, because again, I just mentioned Nexus as being semi-successful in the early weeks and months of their existence, and it was a group of nobodies. It doesn't take the perfect people to make it successful. I do think that it would be better if you put a little bit of calculation into and some thought into to who these guys should be, but a good solid faction, a little surprise, a little shock and awe. Let these guys come out and do some craziness, break some rules, break some faces, whatever. I'm missing factions, Nick, in pro wrestling, and I definitely think a good solid faction would hit the spot for me, and I think it could bring back a little bit of that cool factor again if done the right way. No spirit squads or anything, but again, good faction. That's my thought, Nick. What do you got for him? And unmute your mic. There we go.
Yeah. So it's a good question. And I've I've now been forced to spend a good portion of my Rusev day thinking about this. It's not what I had planned when I woke up. But I think I would offer two things. If you want something specific and concrete, I would say be very careful with Dean Ambrose when he comes back.
Interesting.
They have an opportunity right there to create the next megastar in your company. You know, I think his injury, you know, we hate to see talents injured, but we've talked about this a lot where we say sometimes an injury can be a blessing in disguise. You know, you find the silver lining in an injury.
Sure.
Which is that it gives you that time away from the crowd so that when you come back, they're ready to see you again. And I think that they need to let this guy be the anti-establishment. They don't really have anyone in the company right now that is the anti-establishment.
That's true.
They are the establishment. WWE is the establishment. They need the anti-establishment. I'm not saying be Stone Cold. I don't want anybody to take this to mean, you know, just do what they did with Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Right.
But let someone go against the grain of how WWE does things.
Sure.
So that kind of is going to segue into part two of what I wanted to say, which is that the way, and again, I hate saying like, you know, well, this is what you need to do.
Sure.
I don't know what anybody needs to do. I know what maybe I would try to do if I was in their position, which is really focus on the skills that each wrestler has. What is one wrestler good at that maybe one wrestler is not so good at? So a great example is a guy like a Kevin Owens, right? You can give Kevin Owens the stuff that he's doing on Raw with the, you know, being trapped in a
right.
dumb, you know, porta potty and having his car flipped over, you know, the Sami Zayn stuff. Sami Zayn is great at it too, with all that Sami Zayn stuff with Bobby Lashley's sisters and those long-winded promos. He's very good at that.
Yeah.
So you look at a guy like that and you say, okay, we can have him focus a little bit more on that style of entertainment. Whereas you look at a guy like a Roman Reigns and you say, you know what? Roman Reigns isn't as good at that. You know, we can't give Roman Reigns the 25-minute script and have him do that. What is he good at?
Right.
You know, okay, Roman Reigns is good at getting in the ring and beating people up. So let's emphasize that aspect of him. There are many guys on that roster that can do it all.
Sure.
You know, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn are two examples of guys that are not only good at doing the promo stuff, but they're great in the ring.
Sure.
You know, a Dean Ambrose. That's why I think they need to be careful with Dean Ambrose and use him well, because I think he has all the tools. He's really solid in the ring, and he's that great promo guy. So, you know, those are the Shawn Michaels types, you know, that are very, very well-rounded. But the individuals that are not, just focus on what they are good at. The Baileys, the Sasha Bankses, the Roman Reigns, you know, the Shinsuke Nakamura's, even to a certain extent the AJ Styles. Those talents aren't great at doing the silly entertainment promo stuff. They're better at something else. So figure out what that is and emphasize on that. That's what I think I would do if I were handling some of these talents. But specifically, Chris, to answer that question, this way I kind of cover, you know, I didn't want my discussion of what I would do with the talents to be sort of an easy way out of answering that question. So specifically, Dean Ambrose.
I like it.
I think he's the guy that WWE could really take advantage of when he comes back from injury as pushing as that next guy that can make pro wrestling cool again.
Very nice. And then one of the reasons, and we'll end on this note, maybe a friendly.
There you go. Let's make hats. Make pro wrestling cool again.
Ooh, I like that.
You know, we borrow a popular slogan.
Right. Yeah.
Make pro wrestling cool again, and it does not start with this show.
quick friendly wager. One of the reasons I brought up the faction group, Nick, is because when you mentioned LeBron, that also, when LeBron going to LA, that also made me
right. So LeBron went to LA, and then every other basketball player immediately went to Golden State.
And so I thought we need a good heel group in wrestling, because now the Golden State Warriors. But here's what I said when they got Cousins, Nick, Boogie Cousins, and if you're not, I mean, I know we got a lot of UK fans. It might not be NBA fans. Who knows? If you're not, basically, long story short, Golden State Warriors, 3 out of 4 year NBA champions, easily could win the next 2 or 3 years because of the superstardom these guys have on their team. And when it was already unfair how good they were when Kevin Durant decided to go over there, and now it just keeps compiling. And now, of course, Boogie Cousins is going over there, DeMarcus Cousins going over there, a great center, very good veteran center, just going to make them. But I think, Nick, and a quick wager before we get out of here, my thought process is this. I think it's too greedy. I think karma's going to come back to bite them. I think it's too greedy of them to now go out and sign Cousins for $5 million. And yes, my Mavericks wanted him, and I'm pissed because I wish they could move to the East. But it doesn't matter at this point. My point is, they're too greedy. And as good as they are, I am willing to bet you, Nick. I don't know what we're going to bet. Maybe one of those hats that hasn't been created yet. But I bet you Golden State does not win the title this year. Okay. You taking the bet?
So you're betting against the NWO.
I'm betting against the NWO.
Well, the NWO, the bad guys always fall, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, relating it to pro wrestling, and that's why we've talked about this before. We bring sports in a lot because it has that relevance. I mean, they've now created. With what happened with Cousins going over there, they've now created this super heel group,
I hate them.
Which WWE absolutely could do. But they could also do that with one person. They could create one super heel as well. And it just seems like WWE doesn't want to ever go all in.
That's true.
It seems like they always want to go all in on just one person at a time.
Right. And
it's 9 times out of 10 the person that the fans don't want them to go all in on.
That's true.
So
that's true.
I feel like I don't want to take that bet because I'm going to agree with you.
Well, all right.
Because I think my Detroit Pistons. Here's the deal. Everyone's leaving the East. Yeah. So really, there's only going to be the Pistons are just going to be playing themselves.
Hey, since we're talking about wrestling too and how it correlates, then I tell you what, my Mavericks will come join your Pistons.
There we go.
Big run in, and then they can then go, because we can't do it individually. We'll go take down. Our two teams can then go take down and cheat. The baby faces will cheat to win by teaming up and beating Golden State.
Or maybe it could come down to a certain situation where it's like one of those two teams. It's like if the Pistons end up facing Golden State in the finals next year, the Mavericks can do a run in.
Or a gauntlet match. Golden State should be forced.
Right, or a gauntlet.
Golden State should be forced to face.
They should be forced to face every team in the NBA
in the finals. Just start the finals from day one and just have Golden State.
They've got to play every team until elimination.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we appreciate.
And then once they've defeated all those teams, then LeBron comes out and they just play against him.
Yeah. Right. Well, he'd probably have about as good of a chance by himself. But either way, some NBA talk for you here to end the show. Happy birthday to me. And obviously happy Rusev Day, which always overshadows.
Right, more
importantly. But either way, we hope you enjoyed this. Really got to a lot of things and a lot of kind of just debatable topics, or maybe not so much. I don't know that anybody's going to disagree so much with our overall theme for tonight. But we are very curious. So please let us know in the comment section.
Speaking of Rusev Day, though, it's funny because Rusev actually just said something that was hilarious in that new ride-along episode that they did on Monday night, where he revealed actually that one of the reasons why he was pulled from that that casket match originally against The Undertaker at Greatest Royal Rumble is because when Vince pitched him the match, he laughed at him. You know, and you think about it, it's very similar maybe. I mean, I don't know necessarily what was going on in his head when he laughed at him, but, you know, we do know that he tweeted thereafter, you know, he said something like, bury me softly, brother. Because I think he probably knew it was a foregone conclusion. He was losing that match.
Sure.
You know, maybe it was a similar idea to what Daniel Bryan said, where it's like, you know, tell better stories here. You know, all right, so you're just going to feed me to The Undertaker at the Greatest Royal Rumble? Okay, you know, hey, look.
What's the story there? Yeah.
Having a main event match against The Undertaker is great.
Sure.
But, you know, but there it is. Getting back to the crux of what we talked about, which is to satisfy what every wrestling fan wants, which is the entertainment and the wrestling and the match. It's not enough to just say, okay, you're going to wrestle The Undertaker at this pay-per-view. What's the story?
Yep.
How do you get there? It's the combination of the story and the wrestling match that creates the overall magic. And maybe his idea was, are you kidding me? I'm going to face this guy in, 3 weeks? You know, he's not going to appear on television to help build the match. What are we doing here? You know, yeah, okay, great. It's an honor to step in the ring with The Undertaker, you know, and have that match. And certainly they told a good story in the match.
Yeah.
They did the best they could. They had a really good match, good, fun match. But at the end of the day, is that the kind of full-on story you want to tell? Maybe that's what Daniel Bryan was getting at as well when he's encouraging, let's tell better stories. And how do we do that? We do that with the combination of great in-ring wrestling, and we do it by telling intelligent stories. And that's just something that I think sometimes WWE doesn't want to do, and I think that's a difference, a big difference with NXT in telling those intelligent stories to the audience.
Well, you and I can say this stuff, and it'll fall on deaf ears, but more people like Daniel Bryan stepping up and saying things like he did in that interview, maybe at some point it'll get somewhere. And, of course, next year we've got the big TV deals coming up. That's going to give them a little bit more of a reason.
That's going to give them a kick in the ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know what? Absolutely, guys like Daniel Bryan stepping up, and also guys that are leaving the company, you know, and they're going to sign, you know, the Austin Aries, these kinds of talents that leave and they go and they sign with the top indie promotions. And you know, I will tease now that, you know, we're hoping to get a very special guest for next week's show. And I would like to discuss this more with him on the show. But this idea of, look at all of these companies like Ring of Honor and Lucha Underground and Impact Wrestling that are all sort of banding together, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, they're all working together. And the one thing that we see that is a sort of common thread with all these companies is they're presenting wrestling in a different way. They're telling the story through a more sports-oriented style and a more very serious sports oriented. You've got that entertainment, of course. You got the promos. You've got Impact Wrestling that's doing some of the Undead Bride stuff with soooooo. You know, of course, you've got flavors of that and colors of that storytelling. But they're presenting a product, a sort of almost unified product that is very different from WWE. And I wonder to a certain extent if that will ever be a wake-up call to WWE. And maybe that's a question we can answer on next week's show.
Check us out on fight.tv and, of course, the app. Download that every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And then, of course, prowrestling.com for all your news. Voiceofwrestling.net for more news and, of course, some great editorials and, of course, our show. We love it over there, and I got some great staff that's working hard for you, so check it out there. But for Nick Paglino and the birthday boy, I am Chris Cash. I'm going to go celebrate now. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and big guests next week. We're trying to line it up. We think we got it confirmed. You're not going to want to miss it, I promise. And I say that about a lot of guests, but this one, I assure you, is going to be a big-time interview and a great conversation. So join us next week right here on The Voice of Wrestling. Until then, see ya.